Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and yeah, so couldn't wait. I watched episode 9 of Vinland Saga a few days ago, and I was like, do I want to watch ahead? And I was like, yeah, I kind of do, because I feel like this character Canute that's been introduced, I feel is like a mystery box. And so I know it's going to be a couple episodes before we get more into his character, if it's a man or a woman or whatever. But I'm curious about Canute, and I feel like that's gonna be the mystery box of part of this season, especially as far as characters go. So I'm trying to get a little bit ahead of spoilers so I can watch a little bit more and be prepared for the comments section when I get to it. But yeah, episode 8 was fantastic. I was looking at the ratings because when we started episode 8, I was like, man, it said 16 plus. Has that always been there? It hasn't. Episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all said 13 plus. Episode 6 said 16 plus. And 7 said 13. So I was like, oh. So just kind of amping us up with the violence and the language and everything. I'm assuming as we go further, that 16 plus isn't going away anytime soon. Just gonna guess. It's like a little warning of like, you're about to get into some serious stuff. Hope you're ready. So yeah, we're about halfway through. We're not quite halfway through the season yet. Episode 12 will be the halfway point. I'm curious if they're going to switch cours. I'm assuming they will, but I don't know for sure, right? We don't know if they're going to switch cours or not. And I don't want to, my favorite thing is that when a show switches cours and you don't know it's coming and you're like, oh, cool. And it's a big surprise. So I don't want anybody to tell me, but I'm going to guess that it's going to be episode 12. Gonna guess that the halfway, or maybe 13. Episode 13 would likely be where if they're gonna switch cours, episode 13 would be the first episode in the second half. But so we're officially into the second act now. We've got introduced to Thorkell. He's great. He's a chaos that I like. And Thorfinn is still hellbent on revenge against Askeladd. And Askeladd's just like, I guess if you want to keep working for me, maybe you'll get a chance to do that. I don't know. You know, he's, oh my gosh, Askeladd. But yeah, so that's where we're at right now. I'm pretty excited. I just couldn't wait. I wanted to dive into episode 10 and see what was up. So we shall see, right? I'm pretty excited to see what all goes down in this episode. The last 2 have been probably my favorites so far, 7 and 8. They've been really, really good. And so I'm curious to see where we go to from here. So, as per usual, I hope you all enjoyed the discussion and the reaction, but let's not waste any more time, shall we? We are going to start Vinland Saga episode 10, and we are going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. I honestly debated bringing Whiteboard Coon out because I think I could have this discussion without Whiteboard Coon, but there's a couple of ideologies and little things thrown around that I was like, maybe I want to write them down. So I brought Whiteboard Coon out just in case, but I don't know if I'll be writing a lot on him. Man, this was a surprisingly introspective episode, which makes me think that shit's about to go down. So yeah, this as I knock Whiteboard Coon over, this episode, Askeladd was surprisingly reflective, very reflective. And we've talked in previous episodes, I was wondering how self-aware Askeladd is of the situation, but he is quite reflective and he's quite self-aware. And him and Bjorn are kind of on the same wavelengths. I feel like they're both kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and that's interesting, right? So that's something to think about. And as we go into this, and we'll tie a little bit into like the religious angle of it, and tie a little bit into that, and then tie a little bit into like where these characters are mentally, the strategies of them. Thorkell says, F it, let's just do this. Like Thorkell and Askeladd seem kind of like they have a similar personality when it comes to handling things. It's like they're both like, YOLO, we're only living once, let's do this. But Askeladd is I think Askeladd, because he's older and maybe views the world slightly differently than Thorkell, has a little bit more reflection on it, whereas Thorkell's just like, I want to burn out in the biggest flame possible. Who's going to try to douse me out? Let's do this. Whereas Askeladd's a little bit more cautious. Which is interesting. We got a little bit of mystery with Askeladd now that I'm like, oh, okay. We've got some mystery with Askeladd. He's a mysterious figure in himself because we don't know a whole lot about him. I mean, it's funny. We've seen quite a bit of Askeladd's past. We've seen quite a bit of it. We've seen not his past, but we've seen like his surroundings, like the village that he goes to, his relationship with his uncle. He's told Thor that he doesn't have a wife or child. So although maybe that not having a wife and child wasn't by choice, don't know. But there's things that play here in this episode, especially with this conversation with Thorfinn, that I feel are slowly like peeling back a layer with Askeladd. So it's like Askeladd is an onion, and there's like a little layer, and this episode went, do you want to see it? No, not yet. like it's just the layer was starting to peel back in the episode, like you're not ready for it. So it's like, dang it. But yeah, getting some interesting things here. Some interesting things indeed being talked about. So I want to go through this episode, and I guess Canute's a guy. Just a pretty boy. Guess that's the case. I love how the last 3 episodes I've been debating whether Canute's been a man or a woman. And everybody's like, it's a man. I'm sure, I'm recording ahead, so I'm sure when we get to the comment section, everybody's going to be like, it's a man. And I'm going to be like, shh, but we don't know for sure yet. I haven't seen his dick, so we don't know. Joking. But we really haven't, we don't know anything about Canute at all. We really don't. We just know Canute is the second in line for the throne. That's all we know. We've not heard them speak. We've barely seen their face, if at all. We've just seen their eyes. That's pretty much been it. We've seen like nothing with Canute. So, okay. I thought we were going to skip the intro because they just instantly open up with the Ragnarok with the episode title and saying that they're so cold and everything. How long do we have to wait here? We're not earning anything. So that's interesting. So I guess we'll start there. I guess we should start with, we're going to put Canute. We're going to put Canute over here. All right, we're going to put them there. So we can talk about old Canute and everybody. Out here to the side, way over here, we can talk about the state of the war at this point. Because, I mean, in all honesty, there's tension in the ranks. There's tension among the men who complain they're not earning enough. And they're just stalling until winter. And I think it says something that this is a culture of men and a culture of an army that they are used to going, pillaging, plundering, taking names, taking money, and then moving on. So the fact that they're held up here is probably frustrating to them because they're like, we're not used to doing this and we're not fighting anybody. So what's the deal? Whereas Ragnar's like, if we just wait it all out, then the king will tell us to retreat because it'll be winter. So Ragnar seems to kind of understand how the king functions. So Ragnar, who coddles Canute a lot and doesn't want Canute to fight, Ragnar, he thinks if they can hold out, winter will come. He's like, my king is kind of like Ned Stark. When winter comes, we'll just retreat back. It'll be perfectly fine. No big deal. He thinks that they can hold out here and not have to worry about anything. And the guy says the prince got scared. So we were right about Wessex. I'm sure about it. We got the short end of the stick. So these guys are like, we got stuck hanging out with this scaredy cat prince while everybody else retreated up to Wessex and up north to fight another battle. They're like, we're stuck sticking around here with the prince that doesn't want to fight. Okay. And then Thorkell's just like, bring me all your boulders. I'm going to play shot put for a while. Thorkell is just like, he's like a child. He just wants to fight. And he's like, I'm tired of waiting around. He's like, I'm not going to sit here and wait while they... Because I think Thorkell understands. We'll put Thorkell up here. So we get from Thorkell that he is impatient. But he's also pretty smart. He's smart in terms of battle. He's like, He's like, I know what they're doing. They're stalling until they can leave. He's like, they're going to just sit here and tease me until they can retreat, and then I'm not going to get to fight them. And for Thorkell, that's like the last thing he wants. He's like, I joined the losing side for a challenge, and now y'all are too scared to fight the losing side? He's like, you yellow-bellied cowards, come on. Like, he's not having it. And it's funny because eventually he's just like, screw it. I just need like 500 guys. Let's go take these guys out. So he has 500 followers, and that number doesn't sound like a lot compared to 4,000, but the thing is, they're immediate followers. That line from the Sentry that was like immediate followers, it's like, oh, these are the guys that's just as crazy as he is. They're like, let's do it, let's just go. He like got everybody in a bloodlust, and like who wants to taste blood in the water the most? He's like, let's go, and took the 500 craziest people with him, and that's all they needed, right? To sway, because Thorkell's enough of a problem in his own right. So you've got that. Fun times. But God, he's so huge. And I'm like, it's funny because the opening shot of him throwing the boulder, it seems so far away that you're like, it seems fantastical that he could throw a boulder that far. But then when you cut back and view it from a different perspective, it doesn't seem as far. But you know it is. So the perspective is kind of thrown off a little bit. But at the same time, there is a fantasy like element to this. As realistic as this show is, there is a little bit of a fantasy element, like with Thorkell being able to toss a boulder that far, that you just kind of have to accept with the show, right? But it's fun. Thorkell is a great character, and he's like, none of you have any balls. God, I love it. It's great. Thorkell's like, none of you have the balls to fight me. Ragnar is like, screw this. Ragnar's like, it's interesting, and the soldiers are like, we're disgraces as warriors, let us attack, we're ready to fight. And Ragnar's like, no you're not. He's like, we have 4,000 men, I'm sure we can beat Thorkell. And Ragnar's like, you can't, no, not yet, we're talking about Thorkell. So I will give Ragnar this, he's not dumb. Ragnar, I'm gonna kind of tie this up here to him. Ragnar is not dumb. I mean, there is a reason the king left him in charge. I mean, you could call him a coward, but he's like, no, we can't take on. Ragnar kind of sees, it's interesting, we have all these characters in this episode trying to figure out the means of survival and the means of moving forward in this world where it's literally society overtopping society, and it's this big cycle, and it's just finding your place in the wheel. And where do you go with it, right? How do you ride the spokes and not be thrown outside the wheel, right? So Ragnar's not dumb. He is patient to a fault, and he does not want Canute hurt or to fight, which is interesting. He's really against that whole fight with Canute. I'm curious. I'm very curious about this whole thing with Canute. Canute's interesting. I'm like, is Canute just weak and frail and Ragnar knows this and knows he'll die? Is Canute really smart and a good leader? And does Ragnar think that if Canute takes over from the king, he'll lead the people into... That was another thing, was that when we get to Askeladd's conversation about societies toppling others and one lifestyle fading away into another, I'm curious if Ragnar sees the kind of rule that Canute can implement being the kind that would foster another civilization like the Romans that Askeladd talks about. And that if that is the case, if Ragnar's whole deal is let's keep him alive, and if he becomes king of Denmark, he could usher in a new culture, a new form of society. Because Canute he's Christian, so he is kind of in the more modernized ways of the Vikings, right? Because a lot of the Vikings, like Leif said, a lot of the people in Denmark, some of them were still pagan, some of them were converted into Christianity. And so Canute is converted over to Christianity or has been raised in it. And it's funny because the king says that's made him soft, but yet it's like, that's your son, so you clearly were okay with him becoming Christian. But then, if you think back, back to the Viking warrior ways, then you have Thor's, who was just like, he told Helga, he's like, name the kid whatever you want, you take care of it, I gotta go fight. And Helga was like, no, you're gonna have an investment in this kid. I'm assuming it was kind of the same way the king sired Canute and then was just like, I don't know, you take care of him, and left his wife, the queen, in charge of raising Canute and didn't really oversee any part of that. So if Canute was raised Christian, the king didn't have any involvement in it. So it almost seems like the king views Christianity as just like a bargaining token or something that's necessary, not that he wants to be Christian or that he believes in any of it, whereas Canute seems pretty much devout. Canute seems like he totally believes in it very much and has the priest with him, right? Interesting. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But Ragnar, I think Ragnar is very much like Askeladd in that he's understanding that the ways of the Vikings, I think that Askeladd, Ragnar, and Bjorn are on the same wavelength. They're seeing the writings on the wall. So I'm going to put Bjorn up here. And I'm going to put Askeladd over here because we got quite a bit with Askeladd. But I think that all three of these guys are seeing the writing on the wall, and we'll talk about that as we go. I think they all three, in some ways, see that the era of the Vikings, the way of life they've been living for the last decade, is slowly reaching a climax, and it's about to transition. And I think Ragnar wants to transition it to where Canute takes over. Ragnar's probably like, our king's kind of frail. He don't look like he's going to last much longer, and he's on the battle lines. So if he dies, I want to make sure Canute's still alive to take over and can turn all of this culture and mold it his way. And we may not, be battling endlessly anymore. Because I don't think Ragnar wants to be there. I think Ragnar's like, eh. And it's funny that the end of days is called Ragnarok. Because they think in 20 years the world's going to end. And it may be that the world of the Vikings ends in 20 years. And that's Ragnarok. And it's funny that it's named with him in mind, right? Their names are tied together through it. It's interesting. But yeah, Ragnar's not stupid. He's like, no, we can't be careless. And the troops are like, well, they put us in charge. We need to distinguish ourselves as warriors. I don't think Ragnar cares about the warrior way. I think Ragnar, he does not care about the warrior culture. I think Ragnar's kind of like, nah, I'm not about this. This is, you guys do whatever. I don't think Ragnar really cares about their pristine as a warrior. And he says, when the time comes, His Highness shall give an order. Now is a time to wait. And they're like, come on. And then Ragnar's like, well, this is frustrating because he's just getting closer. And so then we cut to Jesus crucified there. And then the Lord was told, put your sword back in its place. For those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. That line there. Okay. Okay. And so I'm guessing Canute's a guy just with really pretty hair. Doesn't look anything like the king. Takes after the mom, clearly. The priest sounds like the voice of Chris from Ace of the Diamond or Oikawa from Haikyuu. I'm curious to know the priest's voice actor. If anybody knows and wants to comment on that, I'm curious. It sounded like Chris from Ace of the Diamond, but I was like, I don't know who this voice actor is. Maybe they'll get. They don't tell us the priest's name. They don't tell us the priest's name on here, which is sad. Okay, but this line here. Those who take up the sword shall perish by it. Yep. It kind of relates to what Thor's was trying to tell Thorfinn. He's like, you only use this blade to defend yourself. You don't strike people down with it just because. You just defend yourself with it if it's absolutely necessary. Because I don't think Thor's was necessarily Christian, but I think that his belief structure falls in line with the idea. He's like, if you live your life by the sword through violence, you will die that way. It is inevitable. And Askeladd is very self-aware of that, as we see. So he is self-aware of aging and his mortality. Which is probably why the tasks he's giving Thorfinn are getting more and more difficult. Because he doesn't want to duel him, because he knows he's going to die. I that's so funny when he said bring me Thorkell's head in the last episode. I was like, oh, Askeladd, you know what you're asking, because you know how difficult that would be for Thorfinn. But he knows he's got Thorfinn by the balls, and he knows that Thorfinn's going to do it because he's so consumed by his need for revenge. Askeladd's like, you're gonna do it for me, so yeah, go knock yourself out, kid. But he's like, I'm not dumb. He's like, I know how mortal I am. And when we get to that conversation, we'll talk about it too. But yeah, this idea that if you continue to beget violence, violence will beget violence. And if you continue to fight, that's going to be your end, right? And so I feel like Canute is maybe more pacifist than the other Vikings. I get that impression, unless he's just hiding it, unless Canute is just actually this. It could be Canute is this bloodthirsty man that is a expert killer, and we'll talk about that, but has denounced violence and kind of become like Thor's and shed that violent self and has devoted himself to Christianity and to not, because Christianity is all about non-violence and loving thy neighbor and being kind. And so I feel like maybe, because we'll talk about that, Thorkell was super interested once he found out Canute was there. Thorkell was like, let's go. So, and I think there's one of two reasons for that, or both, but we'll get to that. But yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And Ragnar, he's like, can you leave us alone a moment? And so the priest, he looks interesting. He's interesting in this. And Ragnar, and they're like, and you can hear outside the tent, Canute can hear them say, the prince is a coward. So Canute can hear it all. Interesting. And Ragnar saying, don't worry. When winter comes, we'll receive the order to withdraw. We just have to endure until then. So yeah, Canute and him looking at the cross and everything and praying with him, saying, please protect his highness. So Ragnar does care a lot for Canute, right? So Ragnar is Christian too, and he cares for Canute. And Canute, it's interesting how these characters are very self-aware in this episode, and we see how self-aware they are, because, sometimes in shows, when things are happening with one group of people, and they're like talking behind the back of another character, you wonder if that character is aware. And in this episode, we see that, right? So Canute is aware of the soldiers' disdain for them. It'd be interesting if Canute was praying for them all to die. That'd be awful. But Canute's such a mystery box. I'm like, what is up with Canute? Interesting. I don't know. I'm very curious about old Canute here and what we're going to find out about him. And so then this one guy's like, oh, Thorkell, you're still throwing rocks up here. Are they being mean again? And so we have Askeladd. Askeladd is like, he's like, we can't have a battle if they don't attack us. Like, Thorkell's so simple. He's like, I'm trying to coax them into coming over here and they're not listening. But Askeladd, he's like, don't be so loud. I bet they're just being careful. They're under the command of the Prince of Denmark. And Thorkell's like, excuse me? And he's like, the prince is here? What? What? He's like, I thought I already told you. The second prince, His Highness Canute. And Thorkell is so excited about that. So that's curious, right? It's curious. I'm like, so that is curious, okay? So Thorkell is intrigued by Canute. There could be a lot of reasons for that. But here's the thing. Thorkell likes a challenge. He likes a battle. He wants to battle warriors. So why would he be interested in Canute, right? Because Canute on the surface so far does not seem like a warrior. Ragnar has been coddling him. Canute has been just sitting there praying. He does not seem like a warrior. My theory is, yeah, he is. He's just like Thor's. He's given up the sword and he's trying to control himself and push away from violence. That's my theory. He could be a total softie and we don't even know it. Don't know. But Thorkell being intrigued by him, it either goes one of two ways. Either Thorkell knows he's weak and he knows that he's not going to be a challenge, and he's like, oh, if we kidnap him, I bet they'll come battle us. I bet, so they'll come battle us to get him back. That's probably it. Thorkell's probably like, Canute's not very strong, so if I kidnap him and hold him hostage, then they'll have to come to us. They can't hold up in their little hole if the Crown Prince of Denmark is under my grip, you know? So I think that's really what the reasoning is. The only other explanation of why he gets so excited is that he knows Canute's actually a really good warrior and he wants to fight him. But then why would he take him hostage, right? If that were the case. So I think it's more along the first lines. He knows Canute's not going to fight, and he's like, if I kidnap him, then I'll make them, if they won't come to me, then I'll make them come to me, sort of situation. But, oh, buddy. And that was a long intro. That was like 4 minutes before we even got the intro of the episode done. Good deal. So then we have Thorfinn and his vision. Thorfinn's dream. And it's so fun to see Thorfinn as a kid again. But here's the thing about Thorfinn as a kid. Okay, I'm going to put Thorfinn over here. All right. I feel like there's this parallel or this contrast being set up between Thorfinn and Canute. I feel like there's this contrast between these two characters, Thorfinn and Canute. Because Thorfinn, he was raised to have Thor's ideals about being nonviolent and about, you know, only doing it to defend yourself and about protecting your family and things like that. But instead, he's consumed by revenge, right? He's consumed by revenge. Whereas with Canute, it seems kind of the opposite. Canute's father is this king waging war and killing thousands and thousands of people to take over, and yet Canute is over here kind of trying to live out Thor's ideals, even though their situations are quite the opposite, but their ideology structures are so different. Canute does not seem like he cares about revenge at all. Canute doesn't even want to be there, right? So that's interesting. So he has this dream, right? And the dream, does it take place in Vinland? I think it does. I think the dream is taking place in what Thorfinn understands as Vinland, because they talk about it being like the air, like the land being fertile, the grass being green, the animals being able to eat, and he talks about it being so much different than Iceland. I feel like young Thorfinn is having this dream in Vinland because that's the area where everything is fine, right? In his head, he's like, everything's fine there. There's nothing, no bad things happen. There's no slaves. Like he talks about Ilva wanting a slave, but there is none there. There are no slaves. His family are all happy. His dad's alive. Like that's his dream, right? Everything is fine there. So this is his vision of paradise. And I think it's also worth noting that mentally, he still goes back to childhood, right? Anytime that Thorfinn has a dream, he goes back to being 6 years old, because that's when he had the drastic life change that's when his world was completely flipped upside down, was the moment his father died when he was 6. So he has, even though he's 17, even though 11 years have passed, he still mentally is retracking to this time when he was 6 years old, when things were all okay, and right before everything went to hell, right? So that's where he goes back. It's like his safe place in his life is when he was 6. But this conversation with his dad, he's like, oh, this is such a nice place. And so his dad is sitting there talking to him. And his dad, unlike in the last time he had the vision of his dad sounds more normal in this vision, right? Sounds more like himself. And so he's like, I like it here. Mother seems to be feeling better after we moved here. Like he's doing is thinking about his family and how much better things are since they've come there. And that's when his father in his head says, you're my oldest son. You have to protect your mother and sister. You understand, right? And he says, yeah. And then he says, they're both waiting for you to come home. I love Ilva with her hair up. Like her hair's so coarse and thick that when she puts it up, it like sticks out like a Super Saiyan. She literally looks like a Super Saiyan from Dragon Ball Z there. But Thor's, he tells them that he has to protect his family, go home, and abandon his goal of revenge. Which is such a drastic change from back in episode 6 or 7. It's such a change from maybe it was episode 5 even, where it's so different because back then, you know, the vision of his father was saying, oh, you need to get revenge on me. Do you want to get revenge? You need to do it. And Thorfinn's like, okay, yeah. Like that version of his father was telling him to get revenge. But now it's almost like Thorfinn's having second thoughts. He's like, man, I haven't been home in 11 years. And when he has the vision of his village getting burnt down, he's been doing it over and over again while working with Askeladd's men. He's been going to all these villages and destroying them, and we slowly see the sun fading and the gloom coming in, and Thor's is like, do you understand? And Thorfinn's like, he says, stop thinking about revenge. Do you think that would make me happy? Yeah, so then there's that. He's like, why are you doing this? He's like, would revenge make me happy? And that's the big question that gets put out there is Thor's vision. And it's Thorfinn's subconscious asking this, but he's like, why am I going after revenge? Is it really going to make my dad happy? Is it for him? Is it for me? Is it to make me feel less guilty? If I kill Askeladd, will it avenge my father? Will it make me feel less guilty for my father dying in the first place? Will I feel less like it was my fault? Is that it? Again, and Thorfinn doesn't realize that it's not his fault his dad died. There was all these other factors. He just happened to be there when it happened, right? But I'm surprised all of these thoughts are getting brought up with Thorfinn because Thorfinn doesn't seem like he's leaving. That's the thing. What's funny about this is that Thorfinn doesn't have a moment afterwards where he sits there going, should I really leave and go home? He doesn't have that. He still continues on with his mission. He still continues on because he's so consumed by revenge at this point. But I'm glad that the show is having Thorfinn realize, oh yeah, maybe I should go home and see my mom and sister, you know. But then it's this nightmarish scene where if he goes back home, what is he going to see? He's been gone for 11 years. Is the village even still going to be there? Or there's multiple ways you can look at that scene. You can say, okay, is Thorfinn thinking, what happens if he goes home and he finds that his village has been destroyed and his mother and sister are gone? Is he going to feel even worse? Is he going to be like, wow, I couldn't protect my father or my sister and brother and it's all my fault? Is he going to think that? Or is it the scenario that he's been pillaging villages for so long that if he goes back home, will he take that violence with him to his mother and sister? Because in the vision, everything's so perfect and they're not with him in that moment, right? They're not with him. They're off doing their own thing and he's with his dad. So he's like, if I go back home, am I going to bring that violence with me to them and cause them to die? So there's that way of looking at it too. So it may be that revenge is not the only thing Thorfinn is thinking about in regards to his family, that it's the main thing he's thinking about, the main thing. But he's also thinking about, like, what are they doing? What happens if I go home? Will it already be destroyed? Will I bring the violence with me and make it worse? Have I been gone too long? He's like, have I been gone from home too long and now it's not going to matter? I don't know. It's interesting that he's having these thoughts, and it's interesting that his subconscious is telling him that his father doesn't approve of the revenge, and he's like, why are you doing this? And now Thorfinn's like, well, shit, why am I doing this? And having to reaffirm himself. It's also really sad when he wakes up and you see that he killed that guy to sleep there on the hay, that he had to kill that man. Again, Thorfinn is so steeped in violence at this point. Can he get out of it? That's the thing. Thor's was able to get out of it, though, so I do have hope that Thorfinn could if he wanted to, but Thorfinn is not convinced that he can. Thorfinn thinks he's stuck there. And it's funny because his visions, his dreams are starting to say otherwise, but he still keeps on. And he thinks, where was that? He's like, that wasn't home. It wasn't Iceland. He said it was somewhere warm with rolling plains of grass as far as the eye can see. And he doesn't know. And he's like, ugh, you know. And then he just gets up and it's like, and he can't go back to sleep. And he's like, fine. So he gets up to go outside and get some air. And then we cut to him walking away from the man he killed, and he's at the ruins, the outskirts of Bath. And I know just enough about the Canterbury Tales to know the wife of Bath is one of those stories. So you see the outskirts of Bath. So it's November already. So honestly, winter's only about a month or two away. So they just have to hold out for a little bit. And then that shot of the man dying next to the wife, holding her hand. Like, that's just, I feel like it's so symbolic. And the guy who clearly killed them holding up the necklace. It's such a interesting storytelling point. Because that's the thing. Again, this show, you do feel a little bit of empathy towards Askeladd because we get the most out of him in this series. We get the most into his brain and see that he is a complex character. And I do feel for Bjorn because I feel like we've gotten that he's a complex character. But a lot of these Vikings and a lot of this scenario, the show makes sure that they're not the good guys, right? They're not necessarily the good guys. No, they're not people we should admire for heroism. There are warriors among them, but they are not all what I would call warriors. I don't think all of them are honorable like warriors. A lot of them are pirates. A lot of them are just scoundrels who've joined the cause for money. They're not doing it for the honor for any reason other than they just want the money and the rewards that come with it, right? I don't know if I'd consider them warriors necessarily. But this show makes a good point of making you feel like you shouldn't feel like everything's all sunshine and rainbows with him. Like that guy holding up the jewels, like he killed a man and his wife just to steal what she had on her. It's like how much is a life worth, right? How much are these lives worth to them? Not very much. And so we have the ruins up on top of the hill, and they're all down in the valley, like just not caring and just drinking and everything. And Askeladd like goes past him like, ugh, don't care. And so like, what is our leader thinking? So they're questioning Askeladd, right? They're questioning him. They're like, it's almost winter. The main army withdrew to the north a long time ago. So they're questioning Askeladd's judgment. They're like, why didn't we go back up north with him? Right? But we're still picking off gloomy villages. And I think that Bjorn and them are like, well, Askeladd is just trying to earn enough money to leave for the winter. We're just trying to earn. And then the guy's like, well, we should attack a bigger city then instead of these little paltry villages. We could go to Bristol. And the one guy's like, are you dumb? He's like, 100 men against Bristol? That's not going to work. We can't attack a bigger city. And so then they get into this argument and they get restless and they just fight to the death. I didn't think they'd fight to the death. I thought that Bjorn would break them up, but he's like, if one of them dies, kill Askeladd. Just the Viking way, you know? So I like that these two guys, Tor and Tords and Ossie, they can't negotiate. They get so tense and frustrated they just start fighting with each other and they end up killing one another, or at least Tor kills Ossie. But then you have Bjorn and the conversation he has with I don't know the blonde guy's name, but he's been in this show quite a bit, right? We don't know his name exactly, but he tells Bjorn all that's left for this year is to plunder 2 or 3 more villages, which was what those guys were saying. He's like, we just need enough to survive the winter. He's like, and then next year, he says, I hope next year is going to be better. Bjorn is not optimistic. He's like, do you think we'll even have a chance next year? So Bjorn is not optimistic about the future. He's seeing the writing on the wall. And the other guy's like, what are you talking about? And he says, look, we've been plundering for 10 years. This year was bad. There's not much left to plunder. The King of England went overseas. He's like, we've been at this war for 10 years. And this year, the king left. Like, it's about to be over, right? The war is about to be over. Bjorn's like, I don't think that England's going to hold out much longer. He's like, he feels the King of Denmark has won. The war's coming to an end. And the one guy's like, I think it's still too early to call that. He's like, Thorkell's in London. He's a threat. Which is funny. He's like, you saw how strong he is, right? And again, Bjorn says, yeah, he's strong, but he says he's Norse like us. And once the English are about to die, he'll ditch them in a heartbeat. That's so interesting that Bjorn, he is so sure that Thorkell will be loyal to his blood and switch back at the end. So interesting, Bjorn's views. Bjorn doesn't like Thorkell at all, which is interesting because Thorkell and Askeladd are kind of similar, but Bjorn just, I don't know if Bjorn is threatened by him, or, which I think could be part of it, he's threatened by him, he fears him, but he also doesn't trust him. And that's interesting. Or he thinks that it's funny, it's ironic almost, because Bjorn seems like he doesn't trust or understand Thorkell, but Thorkell and Bjorn are similar. They're just fighting to fight, right? But Thorkell doesn't care about the money. He's just chaos. I feel like Bjorn's a little more grounded, and so the chaos confuses him. But yeah, he thinks, Bjorn's seeing the writing on the wall. He's like, we've been at this for 10 years. The king of this country's left. We're going to win. So then what? That's the big question, because these guys, these Vikings, they all profit on war. Their whole deal is that we profit on war. We not only get the spoils of war, we not only, the war gives them the right to pillage and plunder villages and take what they want under the guise that they're helping the king of Denmark. They're like, yeah, we helped you destroy this village and take it over. We just took what was ours. You know, we took our reward, our bounty for helping you, right? And so once the war's ended, the king isn't exactly going to let them plunder the land that's his now that it's his, right? He's not going to let them do that. So Bjorn's like, our whole existence is based on us taking advantage and taking opportunity during war. What are we going to do when there is no more war? How are we going to survive? You know, there's not an office job Bjorn can go get now that the war's ending. So he's like, what are we going to do? You know, are we going to have to start going and trying to conquer another kingdom? How does that work? Like, it's just a cycle. And when the cycle slows down, what ends up happening? And we see in this episode that the tensions start to rise, and these guys that are bloodthirsty, that have spent their whole life taking up the sword, what do they do now? And so Bjorn's kind of worried about it, but he thinks that Thorkell is not going to stick on a losing side. And I'm like, I don't know. Thorkell seems chaotic enough that I think he'd go down with the ship if it meant he could still swim away at the end. I don't know. I don't know if he'd ditch him or not. And then he's like, oh, again. And so I really thought Bjorn was going to break up this fight, but he does not. He does not break up this fight. He just tells the one guy, he's like, oh, just keep track of who dies and let Askeladd know. And that guy's like, are you kidding me again? Like, it's great. Like, Bjorn just does not care. He's like, can't be helped. You know, he's just like, just make sure Askeladd knows afterwards who dies. And the guy's like, oh, what a pain. And so, yeah, we cut to Thorfinn going up here to the runes where Askeladd is meditating in contemplation. Interesting. I love that scene of him with the cloak on the edge of the hill, looking over the land as like dawn's about to come up, standing amidst the runes. It's beautiful. And he's like, a fertile land. It's like the land I saw in my dream. And it's much different from Iceland. So that's interesting. It's funny that Thorfinn is maybe thinking like, okay, maybe Vinland, maybe it doesn't have to be a fantasy land. Maybe I could live here. But that's the thing. What would Thorfinn do? Thorfinn's lived his entire life for 11 years, or most of his life, longer than his childhood, being a part of this Viking crew and taking up the sword. So how does he move on past it? Can he move on? Right now, Thorfinn's whole thing is he just wants revenge. Like, he's not thinking of anything post-killing Askeladd. That has not crossed his mind. It's starting to, though. It's starting to get to him, like, what do you do beyond killing Askeladd? What else can you do? Why aren't you at home protecting your sister and your mom? Why have you been pursuing this? You know? And him seeing his dad and about to fall. And I love that shot of Thorfinn about to fall off his dad's shoulders. And Thor grabs his hand and holds it. Like that tiny little fist in his big massive hand. It's so sad. and then seeing his dad die. And then the last thing he did was like pat his son on the head and hold him. And then that's when that's so good that Thorfinn is just sitting there like staring out and he like grips the sword, right? And I'm wondering in that moment if he saw Askeladd and Askeladd realized it and heard the grip. If Askeladd heard the grip of the sword and he's like, oh, you're up early, Thorfinn. I love the color tones in this episode. The blues and the greens. It's like the sun hasn't even come up yet. I just love that. The blues and the greens with Thorfinn and Askeladd it's so beautiful. So Askeladd is he's having a midlife crisis. He's having some reflection. Maybe he's been reflecting this whole time and we're just now being able to witness it. But I love that he has the Roman coin, right? They probably found there on the ground. I love it. And so the interesting thing about this coin is that it's like Thorfinn just throws it away. Like Thorfinn doesn't care about it. And you could say that Thorfinn throws it away because that's part of his character. He's not in this for the money. He's in this to kill Askeladd. But there's also like another meaning to it of Askeladd realizing the writing on the wall that eventually the Vikings will be outdated. They'll be outdated and will go extinct. I think that's what Askeladd thinks will happen. I think he's like, eventually there's going to come another group that's stronger than us that will wipe us out. Because Askeladd's pretty nihilistic, right? Askeladd does not see, as far as we, the audience, know, Askeladd has come across as very nihilistic. He doesn't see the point in living. He doesn't have much of a purpose in his life. His whole slavery is to living in this world and the freedom that he has. But he's like, that may be coming to an end. So he feels a little bit threatened by that, right? He says you couldn't sleep because they're too loud. And maybe is he self-reflecting? And he's like, go easy on them. I feel like Askeladd is projecting himself like he couldn't sleep either, right? It's interesting. And Thorfinn's like, he's like, they're frustrated since we've been marching a lot these days. He's like, he's like, you got to relax sometimes. And then, yeah, Thorfinn's like, why are you talking to me like we're close? He's like, no. He has a sword drawn. He's like, you've got the wrong idea. We're not friends. I love that he just glares at him. He's like, I bet you think you have me under your control, which is hilarious because you think Thorfinn is self-aware, but then he's still under his control. It's so funny that it's like Thorfinn knows it, but he just can't move past it yet. He's still consumed with that revenge, right? He's like, you're full of yourself. He's like, I'll stop when I slit your throat someday. That's the contradiction, right? That's the contradiction, is that Thorfinn, he is aware of Askeladd's game. He's aware, but he still goes along with it. At this point, it's kind of like there's a saying, there's a principle out there that once you start something, you're compelled to finish it. It's just like a completionist ideology that once you've started, you got to finish it. You've invested all this time. And that kind of goes back to Thorfinn's dream. It's like, it's been 11 years. Thorfinn's probably thinking, well, yeah, I need to go back and see my sister, my mom, but is it too late now? I've invested all this time in trying to kill him. Do I just stop now? Or do I keep going? Like the warrior way would tell you to keep going, right? That's kind of like how Thorkell thinks as well, and how Askeladd thinks as well. So, we're not just going to fade away. We're going to go out in a blaze of glory. But Thorfinn, it's funny because he's aware of what Askeladd's doing, but he goes along with it. It's like he doesn't try to run away or get away from him. He's like, and you fall over and die. And Askeladd's like, oh, I'm so scared. I never imagined a little kid would glare at me someday. You've grown a lot. But then when he looks away, he says, time is on your side. This conversation, God, I love this. Because it's so true. It's what we talked about the last couple episodes. Askeladd, he knows that if Thorfinn if Thorfinn keeps with him, that he will be beat in the end. Eventually. He's like, he'll die. He's like, I know that if you stick with me, Thorfinn, and you keep dueling me, eventually I'm going to lose. He's like, time's on your side. You're younger than me. He's like, you'll keep going. You're going to grow, and I'm going to get old. Someday I'm going to lose to you. He's like, it's only natural. He's like, that's just how this works. Even the strongest die someday. That's such a line. That's such a line because it's such a jab to Thorfinn too. And I don't know if Thorfinn realizes it, but Askeladd's like, you know, it's the same. Time, it just goes in a cycle. Eventually, the older ones, no matter how strong they were, will go down. No one's immortal, right? He's like, your father was super strong, but he eventually died too. He's like, I'm going to do the same. And so part of me thinks that Askeladd wants to keep Thorfinn around because he wants Thorfinn to be the one to kill him. I think that he valued Thor's so much as a warrior, and he's like, okay, kid, you keep at it. Kill me, fine. If I'm gonna die by anybody's hands, it should be you. You're Thor's kid, sure. And Askeladd's enough of like a nihilist to be like, whatever, I don't care. But it's funny because I think he's also trying to tell Thorfinn, he's like, yeah, you'll eventually kill me. He's like, you do realize that. So then what? What will you do after that? When you finally get your revenge, what's gonna come afterwards? How's this gonna end? Right? Where are you gonna go to from there? He's like, look around you, Thorfinn. Those stones weren't made by the people who live in England now, the Saxons. They were made by the people who lived here before the Saxons. He's like, they were a strong people. I love that his face is hidden. And you see like the ways that this episode uses shadows and puddles and hiding faces. Like it's so, you don't know exactly what Askeladd's emotions are about this speech. But he gives it to Thorfinn as like a little lesson, being like, look. He's like, think about it. And he's like, the Saxons destroyed the Romans 500 years ago. He's like, these civilizations, they're not, he's like, this was called Britannia. He's like, these cultures aren't meant to survive forever. They're eventually, it's going to cycle out. This advanced civilization that's more advanced than them was eventually lost. And Thorfinn is like the worst student. He's like, what are you trying to say, old man? Just speak up. And Askeladd's like, you're so impatient. He says you should listen to what your elders say. Which again is another funny jab because you just had in Thorfinn's vision, his elder, his father, trying to give him advice, and Thorfinn's not listening. He's tuning it out, right? But I love this shot of them under the runes. He says, in other words, the world of man is getting older gradually but surely. The Saxons destroyed the Romans, and we're going to destroy the Saxons next. And so then the glory of the Roman Empire is a thing of the distant past. Askeladd's like, he's like, the Romans were this glorious civilized empire, and the Saxons destroyed them. And we're about to destroy those people. So eventually, someone is going to come along and destroy us. He's like, it's a cycle. Askeladd's very aware of it. So he's kind of like, let's live in the moment, right? You only got one life, and it's going to end eventually, right? And Thorfinn's like, we don't really know if Thorfinn gets what he's saying. He says, anyways, according to what the Christians are saying, the last judgment is coming in 20 years. Which is hilarious, because it's like, on the one hand, you would think, you're like, oh, is it really? Because if you think it's only 1013 AD, it's only been 1,000 years. And I think they're thinking of, it would be 20 years from now, because Jesus supposedly was, 27 when he died? Around 27 or 30 when he died. And so if they're thinking of it being around this time, 1013, maybe they're trying to time the end of days to be 1,000 years after Jesus died. Is that around the same time? They think Ragnarok's going to be around the same time as the 1,000 years since Jesus' death, and then resurrection. So interesting. And it's funny because that still happens today. If you're a Christian, there's still people all over. You see it on social media. They're like, oh, it's 2012 was the end of days, or this day is the end of days, 2000 was the end of days. Like, it's over and over again, even though if you're a Christian, your biblical text tells you that no one knows the end of days. That's the point. No one knows. But let you prophesize about it, sure. But anyway, I'm not going to get into a religious conversation here. But yeah, I love it as he says it, like the blood splattering. So Askeladd, and it's curious, he says the Christians say that. So Askeladd, we don't know if there's really only 20 years until the end of the world. We don't really know. Askeladd would make you think in that speech like he doesn't quite believe that. And I don't think Askeladd believes he's going to be around that long. I think Askeladd's like, I'll probably be dead by then, so I don't have to worry about it. He's like, on that day, God will kill everyone, and our world will be completely destroyed. And we see, as we see that, we see Thor kill Ase. And then Thorfinn says Ragnarok. I love them standing side by side. And he says, look, Thorfinn, it's ironic, right? It is the dawn and the age of twilight. He's like, we've got this time left before the end, right? But it's funny. And he says that God will kill everyone, but it's like, will it be everyone in the world will be destroyed, or will it just be the end of the Vikings? You can almost wonder if maybe Askeladd's thinking that maybe in 20 years the Viking reign will be ended. Because, like, Bjorn's kind of seeing in his mind, he's like, well, if we don't have a war to fight over, what are we going to do? Is everything going to implode on itself in the next 10 years? And so by 20 years from now, will another group have come along to take on the King of Denmark and his people? We don't know, right? I mean, we know from history. We know the actual history, but I don't want to know that because I don't want to look it up because I want to be surprised with the series. And him saying, and then we just get them looking out. And I like that Thorfinn's for a moment, he looks at Askeladd like, you're being awfully contemplative today. You're being weird. He's like, you're not being your usual self. And Askeladd, them looking out at the field, that's when they see the horseman, right? He says, it's a horse. And I love to ask, Thorfinn's first reaction is, I'm gonna cut it. That's like his first reaction. And Askeladd's like, whoa, son, hold on. Wait a minute. He's an ally. I'm glad he can tell from so far away with the helmets. He's like, that's weird. He's like, I thought we were the only ones in this area. So they didn't even know about the Prince of Denmark then. And so he's like, wonder King Sven. Interesting. There's so much like father-son vibes with Thorfinn and Askeladd in this episode. Like, of all the episodes we've had so far, this has definitely been like the most father-son like we've ever seen Askeladd with Thorfinn. Or maybe like ancient uncle with nephew vibes. So then this guy comes. He's like, oh, you're from the main army. I'm from Ragnar's unit under His Highness Prince Canute. And he's like, I've got a message for the main force. And he's like, are they close? And I like that Askeladd's like, When he's like, I've got a message for the main force, you can just see the wheels in Askeladd's mind turning. He's going, now wait a minute. He's like, why are you here? Why would you want to go see the main force? This is probably something important. So we should find out before you go tell everybody else. Because he's an opportunist like that. And he goes, oh, no, wait. He's like, unfortunately, the main army is far north, which is true. They're on their way home. And he's like, then what are you guys doing here? And he's like, oh, we're just trying to earn some pocket money in that village over there. And he's like, you separated from the army on your own? And he's like, oh, yeah, that's just how we roll. He's like, we're a little more reckless than everybody else. And I like that he lures the man in, being like, you want to trade this old horse for a new one? I like that that's just how he lures him in. I was like, should have known that guy was going to die the moment that he did that. And they're like, Thorkell. And as they offer him the water, he's like, yeah, he's almost there. There's 500 men. He took along only his immediate followers. So they're headed to the main force. They're following the main army. They'll reach Marlborough soon. Oh. And he's like attacking the main army with only 500 men. Because, yeah, that means there's like 16,000 men left. He's going to try to take on 16,000 men with 500. what? And he's like, well, what about London? Like, weren't we going to stop that whole thing? He had 4,000 men. And this guy's like, they were defeated a long time ago. I'm one of the survivors. And Askeladd's like, oh, huh. So yeah, and then we see that Thorkell was just like, screw it. If you guys won't take the battle to me, I'll come to you all. And he just run, no ceremony, didn't say I'm coming to get y'all. They just showed up on the shore while they weren't ready and said, peace up, A-Town, let's do this. He loves his favorite choice of weapon is grabbing them big tree trunks and slamming them against people. And he's like, fine, you people won't fight me, I'll fight you. Oh my God. And then Ragnar, meanwhile, is like, we need to go. We need to get out of here. And so we see Askeladd. Okay, we see him. So Askeladd, we're gonna put him up on the map here with Thorkell. He's his English buddy, right? So we have Askeladd, who is his English buddy. He seems to be like the one that Thorkell relates to and seems to trust the most out of all the other guys. He seems to be, he's on the same wavelength as Thorkell, all right? As strong as bears. Yep. And yeah, they're pretty much wiped out. They're making a beeline for the main army. And Ragnar's like, shit, gotta get out of here. And I like that this whole time, they've just been sitting there praying with his sword. And just praying for the men dying as the battle is going on. Oh my God, praying for the men dying. It's insane. So yeah, I'm like, oh wow, okay. All right, you didn't fight, you just prayed for those guys dying. All right. And then Thorkell just rips up the tent, just rips up like, I found you. Sup? Oh my God. He's like, I found you, Prince. Oh. And we see like the crucified Jesus there on the ground at his feet. So then they're like, well, what happened to His Highness? And he's like, they captured him. He's with Thorkell's army. The remaining soldiers are trying to regroup to get His Highness back. They have less than 400 men. Okay, so Canute is with Thorkell and about 500 men. There are 400 men that I'm assuming are with Ragnar. Unless Ragnar's been captured too, which could be the case. There are 400 men trying to chase and get him back. But that's 400 of 4,000, right? So it's like not nearly enough. So it's like 10% of the army, right? And he says their morale is low. He's like, they're just doing it out of obligation. And so they're not really, here's my marker here. He's like, the men are just, they're not really in it for anything other than to get the prince back, because they're like, shit, he's our crown prince, we gotta get him back. But they don't really have much morale involved in it. And then this guy's like, I'm gonna go ask the main army for help, like get Floki. He's like, I'm gonna go ask Floki and the king if we can get some backup before Thorkell gets to them. He's gonna try to beat them to the punch. And he's like, if you 100 men want to come along and help out, that'd be great if you want to join the cause, and that way the sides would be even, right? And they're all looking at him like, you just told us that Thorkell took down 3,600 men, and you think our 100's gonna make a big contribution to this. Cool, I'm glad you think so highly of us, right? And Bjorn's just like, And he looks over at Askeladd like, it's your decision. What do you think we should do? I think Bjorn's like, this is a bad situation either way, right? And Askeladd's like, I love that he looks up at the sky and sees the clouds. And part of me was wondering if he was looking up at the sky, like waiting for something, like to see if the clouds were a sign of the weather, maybe that something in the weather was going to happen, and that would give them a favorable condition for an ambush, like if it was going to rain or something. He's like, this isn't the time for us to fade into the twilight. I do like that. So Askeladd, he is like, we are not fading away. That is not the Viking way. We're not going to fade into the twilight. And they're like, what? He's like, sorry, I've been having a really existential conversation with Thorfinn this morning. You know, it's been an eventful day so far. He's like, can you hear it, Bjorn? So then we see this blonde woman. I'm assuming it's a woman. This blonde. Can you hear it? So, can you hear it? And there's a blonde. Is it a woman? Is it Canute? Who is it? I'm like, well, this is the first time we've had any introspection into Askeladd's past, and possibly, but the only things you can note about the blonde is that I'm assuming it's a woman, but that their clothes are a little bit rattier and their hair has like string. I'm like, is it supposed to be Hordaland? Is it supposed to be Hordaland that he's looking at? The slave? That would make sense if it was Hordaland, because that ties to his whole thing. He's talking about Hordaland came from a noble family who had lots of wealth and resources, but they were conquered and defeated and became slaves and faded into the twilight, right? Hordaland's family faded into the twilight and were taken over and conquered by the Danish. So he does not want to just give up and accept being conquered. He knows that it's a possibility. He's like, it's history. Askeladd's like, history has shown us that it's going to be eventual. Eventually, we are going to be conquered by something or someone. He's like, but do we just sit down and let it happen? Or do we fight it? And he's like, I'm not going to sit down. I think that that's Hordaland that he was looking at, and she let it happen. She let herself be conquered by her uncle, right? I feel that that's what he's seeing there in that moment. And that look on his face is like, I'm not going to be like her. No. He's like, I'm not going to sit down and let it happen. He's like, I'm going to fight to the death. Right? That look on his face is so... I'm going to get a picture of that. That look on his face is so good in that moment. He's like, no, I'm not going to sit down here and lie down taking that. Absolutely not. It's like the sound of the footsteps of Ragnarok. That face, I like that face better. The sound of the footsteps of Ragnarok. He's like, can you hear the end? He's like, the sound of the end, the final battle, the final drums getting closer to us. He's like, are you just going to sit there and let it come, or are we going to rush towards it, right? And Bjorn's like, excuse me? And he just cuts the guy's head off. And Bjorn's like, aha! Aha! This is why these men follow him, right? And Thorfinn's like, why'd you do that? Thorfinn's like, interesting. And I wonder if Thorfinn's contemplating anything that has to do with that speech, anything that has to do with him talking about Ragnarok and everything. Thorfinn, I'm wondering what he's thinking in that moment. But yeah, it all makes sense now why he killed him. He's like, bury him and the horse he was riding. We don't even want the horse. We don't even want anybody recognizing it. And Bjorn's like, okay, I guess. He's like, listen up. Got my plan. My plan's all figured out. He's like, we're going to go save Prince Canute. We're going to go do it. We're up against 500 of Thorkell's men, but we're not going to ask for help. He's like, no. He's like, we're going to gamble. He's like, I'm a gambling man, and we're going to take a gamble here. He's like, if we go ask for their help, then they're going to get Prince Canute back, and there's nothing in it for us. We've just died for no reason. We've died for the cause of the king. He's like, no, that's not how we work. He's like, no. We're going to take a page out of Thorkell's book. His Highness is second in line for the throne of Denmark. He's like, we are going to get a lot of money no matter who we hand him over to. And I love that smirk. He's like, can you just imagine the rewards that we're going to be granted by either Denmark or England? We can't let anyone else take it away right under our noses. And his men are like, oh yeah! So that's so fitting of Askeladd's character, because during this whole existential crisis he's having. I was like, this seems a little bit out of, but we don't know Askeladd's character very well, so it's hard to say it's out of character. It may very well be in character for him, because Askeladd puts up a big front, right? This entire series, there's layers of him. Some of it's genuine, some of it's more performative. And I feel like this is kind of a mix. Askeladd's like, we may be very well marching to our death, but Askeladd's an opportunist. And he's like, what better opportunity than take the crown prince and kind of do like what Thorkell says, and says, which side's going to be more fun? Which side's going to benefit us the most? Is the King of Denmark going to benefit us the most? Or is the King of England? What are we going to do? Let's take advantage of this and see what'll happen. It's just the type of chaos that fits Askeladd's personality, and I love it. And they're like, this is going to be ours. And it just riles his troops up, and they all get excited. They're like, yeah! They're like, we like when there are some dangerous odds. We can do this. And Bjorn's like, I think Bjorn knows exactly what he's doing. He's like, what are you going to do now that you've stirred them up? He's like, we're up against Thorkell. How are we going to win? And Askeladd's like, who knows? And Bjorn's like, what do you mean, who knows? I feel like Bjorn, up until this point, has always known Askeladd's had a solid plan, because he's a pretty good strategist. And Bjorn's like, you do realize, I feel like Bjorn and Ragnarok are kind of similar, being like, this is Thorkell. He's not to be messed with or taken lightly. Bjorn and Ragnar they're like the brunettes with the understanding of Thorkell's presence. And Askeladd's like, what do you mean, who knows? And he's like, this is the age of twilight, Bjorn. Let's go out with a bang. He's like, all I know is that I don't want to just lie down and die. He's like, I'm going to keep fighting. And I feel like Thorfinn looks at him being like, he is going to fight till the very end, right? I feel like that was kind of another reason for Askeladd to say that, in that he's like, I'm not going to just let this kid come and kill me. Yeah, he probably will. He's going to get strong enough one day to kill me. He's like, but I'm not going to lie down and take it. He's like, I'm going to fight till the bitter end. He's like, Askeladd's like, I still got some fight left in me. And then Thorfinn looking at the runes, being like, okay, interesting. I like that last shot. That's a pretty good one. And then that's the episode. Huh. So again, I'm really interested in Canute. Want to learn more about Canute. I think that the blonde was Hordaland. That was related to what Askeladd's thinking of. I don't think Askeladd's not the romantic type at all, although he could be, but I don't feel like he's that way at all. I think he's got too much, fire in his blood for that. But who knows? Maybe him and Hordaland had a thing. Who knows? I doubt it, but interestingly enough. And so then Thorfinn is left contemplating, the point of this revenge. He's still consumed by it. He's still going after it, but it's good to know that in the back of his brain, his father's words are still there, and they're still nagging at him. It's like, what do you do? And so I'm glad Thorfinn's at least thinking about these words, even though he's not quite following through with any of it yet. I like the tie-ins with Bjorn, Askeladd, and Ragnar. I think that's all good. They all know how dangerous Thorkell is. There's that. Thorkell's like, screw y'all, I'm going to bring the fight to me. Respect the dude for that. And meanwhile, Canute is being held hostage. That's what I'm curious about, because Thorkell doesn't seem like a hostage-taking guy, but I think Thorkell is thinking along the same lines as Askeladd, being like, Thorkell isn't in it for the money, though, right? He's not in it for the money. Thorkell's in it for the battle. So, just like Askeladd's like, well, come on, guys. He's kind of a slave to his troops. He's a slave to his men. He's like, we got to keep going. Got to keep y'all motivated somehow. Here, we'll go do this big risky gamble, because if we die, we die. And if not, we'll get a lot of money and we can negotiate with whoever we want for the prince. So Askeladd knows the value of Canute, and that it'll keep giving him what he doesn't want to fade out, right? He wants his way of life to continue. And so taking Canute hostage is a way to extend that. Thorkell taking Canute hostage is being like, they'll all come to me to fight. That's what I want. So I'm going to hold you hostage so they have to come to us. So we have, they'll come to us to fight. So that's his whole purpose. And Ragnar is just like, I just want to get the prince and run off. Can we do that? So, This is a really good episode. I liked this a lot. I'm very excited to see where it goes to from here. So I may watch ahead. I don't know. I've talked for a solid hour about this, But I may watch ahead and just see what happens. So I will, if anybody does have any cool comments though, I will have those in future episodes. So no worries there. But yeah, I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen. So I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm really excited to see what episode 10 will, or episode 11. We're already at episode 11. This was episode 10. So I'm excited to see what episode 11 will bring. And then we're nearing the halfway point. So, of season 1. So we shall see, right? But in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Vinland Saga.